Good evening and welcome. Hagood Mill Foundation is pleased to present a panel discussion entitled Seeds of Change. We want to welcome everyone out there in Wi-Fi land who are sitting at home and watching this tonight. We also want to thank everyone that came out in person to watch this tonight. My name is Billy Crawford. I'm the director of the Hagood Mill Historic Site. We have a great evening in store for you guys. So let's just sit back and take a ride and have a good time and enjoy everything that we're out here doing. It's all for the good. Anything's possible. To lead us tonight in the invocation and pledge of allegiance, I want to introduce the Mayor of Pickens, Fletcher Perry, who will lead us in this. Fletcher?
Let us pray. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not into your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your path. Father God, it's once again that we come humble as we know how, thanking you for the day. Thanking you for the sunshine and thanking you for the rain. Now, Father, as we gather here today, Father, we ask that you give us an open heart and an open mind to be receptive to the thing that's going to be said today, Father. And Father, when we leave, God, we ask that you put it into action. And Father, let it be the words of our mouth and the meditation of our heart be acceptable in your sight. These things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. If you would please stand, face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you, Mayor. Next, I'll ask Marshall and Leon James to come up on the stage. Marshall and Leon James have been singing together and with their family for many, many, many years. Their father, A.B. James, started a family singing group, and Marshall and Leon and their older brother, who is now deceased, Albert, was in that group with those guys. Their father taught them how to sing harmonies by using the shape note style of do, re, mi. For their whole life, they've given back to the community and to their church, singing at social gatherings, church events, and anywhere they were asked to perform. They performed at Hagood Mill many times. I consider these guys members of my extended family. They've supported us beyond belief. These guys have, like I said, have been giving back their entire lives. In 2015, these guys were honored for the things that they've done by being awarded the G. Laney Harris Folk Heritage Award, which is a very prestigious award. These guys, like I said, they have gone above and beyond for the Hagood Mill and the Hagood Mill Foundation time and time again. And like I said, I'm just honored to know them and call them friends. And they're here to remind us that anything is possible if you only believe. So I want to introduce to you Marshall and Leon, the legendary James brothers.
Oh, let believe, my Lord, oh, let believe, my Lord, oh, thank God, oh, if you only believe, my Lord, oh, let believe, my Lord, oh, let believe, I believe that all things are possible if you only believe, my Lord, oh, believe. My Lord, let believe. I believe that all things are possible if you only believe. I met God one morning, my soul feeling bad, my heart heavy done. I had a bow down head. He lifted all my burden. Right now, I'm feeling glad. That's why that all things are possible if you only believe. My Lord, I believe. My Lord, I believe. I believe that all things are possible if you only believe. My Lord, I believe. My Lord, I believe. I believe that all things are possible if you only believe.
All right, I want to thank everyone for your attendance this evening. I'm going to start out the program with reading a few excerpts from different authors about a sense of place. Dennis Chastain was once described by Greenville News as a modern-day Daniel Boone. He has spent most of his adult life exploring, photographing, and writing about the area now known as the Jocassee Gorges. I'll be reading an excerpt from Dennis's introduction to Portrait of Southern Appalachia Community, Book 1. This book was written by 5th graders at Holly Springs Elementary in 2006 under the guidance of Dr. Betty McDaniel. In his recent State of the State address, Governor Mark Sanford recalled that while living in New York City, he had noticed that when meeting people for the first time, they invariably asked, "What do you do?" Here in South Carolina, Sanford observed, we asked, "Where are you from?" True enough, here in the South, one of the first things we want to know about someone is, where did you grow up? Where are you from? There's good reason for this. Where we grow up, where we spent our formative years, speaks volumes about who we are. Although we are often not even aware of it, the long-held values and principles that parents, relatives, and others in a community pass on to their children tend to stay with us for a lifetime. This fundamental fact of life makes it all the more important that children growing up in the Holly Springs community learn as part of their formal education where they are from. The children listen to stories of long-dead ancestors and the trials and tribulations of surviving the Depression years and the Second World War. They heard stories of Grandpa's liquor still and buying penny candy at Ralph Chastain's old store. They heard tales of rattlesnakes and copperheads and marauding mad dogs. They discovered the culinary secret to making possum pie. They learned what it was like to walk 2 miles to a 1- or 2-room schoolhouse. and how swift and certain a good paddling from Miss Katie Hendricks was for the slightest infraction of school rules. They heard tales of hunting, fishing, and camping adventures at local landmarks such as the Horse Pasture, the East Otoe Valley, Camp Adger, Gauley Falls, and Table Rock. They tracked and sorted out the often intertwined branches of family trees. They listened, they tape recorded the testimonials, and most importantly, they wrote it all down. Many of us old-timers take great comfort in the fact that things have remained pretty much the same in Holly Springs, but things are changing. I would dare say that more people have moved into the broad area that comprises the Holly Springs school community in the past 10 years than at any other time in the past 200 years. Things are changing, and they are changing fast. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Change is inevitable, and if you trace your ancestry back far enough, you come to realize that we are all, in a very real sense, from somewhere else. But it makes it all the more urgent, all the more important that we record our history before it is lost and the community is changed forever. The next excerpt comes from Dr. Mike Cogershall. Dr. Mike Cogershall is a professor of anthropology at Clemson University. In 2007, he met Mabel Owens Clark and her family, the remaining members of a small African-American community, Liberia, near Dacusville Community. Afterwards, he researched, interviewed, and wrote the book Liberia. The book tells the story of 5 generations of the Owens family and sheds new light on the African-American experience in Appalachia. On her deathbed, Mabel Clark's mom asked Mabel not to let Soapstone Church go. Since then, Mabel, who is a chef in her own right, has been cooking every 3rd Saturday for the community in order to pay the mortgage on the Soapstone Church. They still need around $25,000 by this December to pay it off, and all profits from the book, Liberia, will be used for this purpose. The book is on sale in our mercantile. Again, here's what it looks like. Okay. I'll be reading an excerpt from Liberia by Dr. Cogershall. Despite the tremendous forces of racial antagonism and economic desperation propelling Liberia's residents to leaving their communities, 2 equally strong forces pulled them back: aging relatives and a longing for the land their ancestors had fought so hard to obtain and retain. These forces are intertwined, for land and people connect through memory and story in upstate culture, for both black and white. Land becomes symbolically important because ancestors owned it, because descendants still own it, live on it, and tell stories about it, and because kin may have been and continue to be physically embedded in it through burial. Aging relatives maintained a dwindling hold on land, and so many times children return to care for aging relatives and to safeguard their family's heritage. Liberia's residents proudly held on to their lands and some of their land titles for several critical reasons. They had struggled against racist pressures to deprive and or cheat them of ownership. They had worked so many decades, even centuries, to earn the money to own that land, and they had established spiritual and emotional ties to that land. Mabel Owens Clark remembered that her uncle had everything marked off on the property map, and it was just like reading the Bible. And him and my mother would sit there at the kitchen table and go over it, over and over, year after year, Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. In fact, Angela Young, Mabel's cousin, listed by memory every land purchase made by her linear relatives, beginning with the freed slave Joseph Mitchunkin in 1869. Owning land was just a priority for him, Mrs. Young added. And Daddy went so far as to, even when he drew up his will, to put in there that the land that he left us, his children, was never to be sold. That's the same thing my mom and dad said too, Mabel added. They instilled that in us for some reason. Despite the powerful hold of land and memory, by the early 1960s, very few residents remained in Lee area. Those who remained, however, witnessed some dramatic changes that escalated through the next decade. Because of the nation's civil rights movement, Jim Crow segregation gradually faded as blacks entered a diversifying workforce and a nationalizing region. Paved roads and electricity made this rural-urban connection stronger, and various forms of mass media brought national and international news into every home. Chris and Lula Owen still bantered politely with their white neighbors, but more frequently now topics might have included thoughts on the race problem, perhaps stemming directly from the unspoken tension between the diminishing perceived loss of control by whites and the increasing relatively equality of blacks. Lee area soon faced the darkest episode in its history, an episode that then became its brightest moment. You'll have to purchase the book to find out what that is. And remember, these books are on sale in our mercantile. 100% of the proceeds go to support the Soapstone Church. And they have until December to pay off that mortgage, as a reminder. Finally, I'll read an excerpt written by Dot Jackson. Dot Jackson was a beloved Pickens County resident, now deceased. She was an author writing the novel Refuge and a prize-winning journalist, including a Pulitzer Prize nomination. She loved helping young students of history and creative writing and assisted fifth graders at Holly Springs Elementary in learning to interview, transcribe, and write about Pickens County founding families. I'll be reading an excerpt from her introduction to Portrait of Southern Appalachian Community, Book 2, about our sense of place. This book is also available for sale in the mercantile. Indeed, we are old on this land, in this hill country. We came to trade with the Cherokees while it was still their land, and some of us married among them. When the tragedies of war and burning and treaties were played out, we rushed in behind the vanquished and claimed what had been theirs, because it suited us like nothing we had seen before. Generation upon generation, we stayed and we connected. Our families are tied to each other as we are tied to the land. We have so much common history, and one of its foundation stones is pride. Some would say more pride than is good for us. Those of us now old still flinch when we think of how our mothers reminded us every day, sometimes with a pinch and a fierce whisper in our ear, remember who you are, which meant use your napkin. Don't use that word. Go kiss Granny Creeps right this very instant. Behave and don't you dare bring dishonor to your family. Nothing was ever an individual sin or virtue. Everything, good or scandalous, reflected on the name and the kin for at least 100 years, or so we were promised. The times have altered some of that. Mothers are too frantically busy to be so obsessed. Once close-knit clans are scattered and harder to tar as a unit with the brush of a single juvenile misdeed. Beyond that, many of the hours that families once spent together, the leisurely instruction through shared chores and conversation, the teaching of what's important, by way of family stories that once filled summer evenings on the porches and winters by the fire, have gone the way of the butter churn and the rhythm of hoes in the cotton field. Who among the young knows now the way to build a bird trap, or travel by the stars, or smell a snake? Who now, used to restaurants with tablecloths and flowers, could imagine the dining experiences of Sam Baker, some of whose memories spanning 90 years were chronicled in last year's oral history book? And now, to the lack of family time, the barriers of electronics, the cell phones, iPods, earphones, and gadgets that block rather than aid communication between generations. Such obstructions are like the massive dams downriver that now bar migratory fishes from our upcountry streams. There are wisdoms and species that are simply not allowed to pass. If history were pretty much discarded from public education decades ago as a subject too dull to force upon the young, the experiences of these scholars, talking one-on-one with their neighbors to whom the past really happened, show the error of such a short-sighted notion. The texts and the teaching may have been dull, but when the stories come live from the people who saw the times and events take place, who survived the hardships and bear scars of the wars, then history and heritage become a shared adventure. Real communication was in progress. Wonderful stories were being told. History of the home-style sort was being recorded, which may be more accurate and more interesting than much that comes in weighty volumes. Once again, we are finding who we are, and all told, it's pretty good.
Hey everybody, I want to introduce somebody to you tonight, one of our beloved people here that lives right across the street, almost, Dr. Thomas Clore. He is going to do a speech on From a Historian's Perspective, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Tom. He lives in Pickens, like I said, just about across the street from the mill. He is a professor emeritus at Furman University and an outdoor enthusiast. He received his bachelor's degree from Cumberland College in Kentucky, his master's degree from Clemson, and his PhD from the University of South Carolina. He was the first South Carolina Governor's Professor of the Year, chosen by the Office of the Governor and the South Carolina Commission on Higher Ed. He was the first faculty member in Furman's history to win both Meritorious Teaching and Meritorious Advising Awards. And he was the first non-Black sponsor of Furman Student League for Black Culture. And so now I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Thomas Clore.
Thank you, Betty. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here for this occasion, especially with this group of people and for this kind of gathering. When Betty called me, I was working on a paper for Pickens County Pioneers in Civil Rights. Didn't have to look far. I didn't have to spend a lot of time. Fletcher Perry integrated the junior high down here as I finished college and applied to teach in this school district. Now here's what's never been mentioned about anybody that's talked about Fletcher. He did all of that during adolescence. Can you believe that? I don't know about you, but for me, adolescence was a train crash, train wreck. Altercations with peers, altercations with authority, altercation with teachers. And I understand what he went through because I know the system when I applied. I applied the same year that Fletcher integrated the school. And when I was finishing college up in Kentucky, and my parents, we've always been a nomadic sawmill family. We just moved where the sawmill went. And I was born in Cherokee County, North Carolina, near Hanging Dog, where my grandma intermarried with the Wolf clan of the Cherokees, all of her folks. And then we had the mill near Shooting Creek, and we had the mill on Turnip Town in northern Georgia, and we had the mill in Stinking Creek, Tennessee, right next to the college there where I attended. And then we heard about a huge project that was going to take place down in Pickens County, South Carolina, and they're going to build 2 big lakes, and there's all that timber to cut. So my wife and I said, let's apply to Pickens County School Administration. When I did, they said, you have to take the National Teachers Exam. I said, no problem. He said, yeah, and you'll have to take South Carolina history so you know about the history. Well, I'll do that. When I brought the scores in, it was a very interesting encounter. The representative of the school district, the same year Fletcher Perry integrated the junior high, looked at my scores and said, these are extremely high scores. You know why we have that, don't you? I said, well, I was afraid to say, to tell you the truth, but I said that's a level of competence, I presume. He said, no, it's to keep out the N word, the representative of the schools. And then he saw he had me on the rope, so he gave an uppercut and said, there'll be no N's where you're going to be teaching. And I just walked out aghast. I know what Fletcher Perry went through. And there's a proud tradition in America of praising dead progressives. But I'm going to change that honor tradition tonight, and I want to praise Fletcher Perry because I know what he went through. I know the courage it took. I know what adolescence is. Because of my train wreck, I spent many years studying adolescence. And I wasn't the only one that had wrecked, I found out. That it's a time in life. I did 65 research studies, and I'll tell you that it's a very trying period of life. And for somebody to huddle near a wall and have racial slurs thrown at them is unbelievable. In adolescence, at least. So I'm going to praise a live progressive. Not one that's already dead, one that's alive, sitting here. Very recent. Thank you for courage, for your hope, for your optimism. Helen Keller said optimism is the faith that leads to achievement. Optimism. We were talking, the guys and I were talking, you got to have hope. Keep hope alive. I'm delighted that we chose Seeds of Change. I grew up grubbing. For you that are not familiar with Southern Appalachian sawmill village language, that means clearing woodland so you can plant something, plant some seeds and grow something. I learned early in life that there's constant tension between weeds and seeds. Seeds and weeds. After when I cleared a piece of land, my brother and I were using a misery whip. That's that's what sawmill people call a 6-foot long cross-cut saw. And you go through misery, whipping it back and forth, dropping trees. When I was doing that, I was standing in a patch of poison ivy. And there were poison ivy vines, a noxious weed. Now get this, a noxious weed. And I lost consciousness later because I had same as second-degree burns over 2/3 of my body. And it poisoned my blood. That's the one thing I want to get across. Noxious weeds can poison people's blood. Been there, done that. I know what Seeds of Change can do, but I also know the competition that they're going to encounter. Goes all the way, the weeds do, from the nice weeds down on the creek over here, like that beautiful cardinal flower weed and the New York ironweed. Oh, nice weeds. But then there are the noxious weeds. And they're the ones that will poison the blood of people if they can. I want to make that clear now. In 1954, Brown versus Board of Topeka was the same year that my school burned, like Mayor Perry. And I had to be bussed across to another school far away, and every day, almost every day, was a fight when a group of guys would jump me for a fight. And I hated that. Why couldn't I go to a school close to where I lived? So I understood about my best friends, Mark, Luke, and John, my black neighbors. I lived in Turnip Town. I lived next to some of the finest black people that ever lived on earth. Mark Twain, I think, was the one that said, "Nothing is more harmful to prejudice than familiarity." That's true. Nothing is more harmful to prejudice than familiarity. I loved the Floyd Roberts family. And Floyd Roberts and my dad were the dearest of friends. They were my neighbors. There were 9 children, and all 9 of those children became very successful in business, in education, in medicine. Familiarity is harmful to prejudice. Mark, Luke were twins. Horace and Joe Charles were closer to my age. And when I would go to their church, Pleasant Grove, and hear that good singing like we just heard, and Floyd Roberts would never let a special occasion go by without we were invited to his church. And there we learned what love was really about. We learned that there are very different cultures that have very fine quality, and the African American culture was one of them. I can remember so well, I was talking to my brother the other day, and I said, "What do you remember best about Pleasant Grove?" He said, I wanted to go to every special occasion because they had that big tub full of ice, and any drink you wanted to get, just reach down and get it and pop it off, and you had your cold drink. And when we were there, and many times in July, those drinks came in so handy. I think part of my sensitivity developed because of I understood when Mark and Luke and Frankie and Joe Charles and Horace had to drive all the way to Pickens County, Georgia, to find a black school when there was a good school right there next to Turnip Town. Why? Well, Brown versus Board of Topeka planted some good seeds and said, you don't have to go to another school. Now remember, that's 54. It was 66 when Fletcher Perry finally got to integrate the school. I remember 1955, Rosa Parks, honored, how she was honored when she died. Rosa Parks was told she had to get up and give her seat to a white man. She said, "No, not today." And that started the Montgomery boycott. I never will forget it because I was made aware of it as to how my friends, my black friends, were treated, and I knew what they were going through. 1956, all year long there had been the boycott. The big fat arse men had plenty of places to sit, but the money was low. The money was low. So they integrated the buses there in that racist place, one of the most racist in the United States. Rosa Parks. Well, honored though when she died. We have that proud tradition of honoring dead liberals. And it happened when Rosa died. She's the only lady ever to lie in state in the Capitol Rotunda in Washington. In 1957, I remember I was watching with a little imagination our snowy black and white TV, and I heard about the Little Rock Nine. I sent 1,200 paratroopers to Little Rock to see that those 9 got into Central High School, and he won. He won over noxious weeds that were trying to choke it out. But he sent in the paratroopers to protect. Now get this point, it's probably the best point I'll make. To protect the protesters. Not attack the protester, protect the protesters. This country was built on dissent. It was built on protest. We protested to England to get our freedom to be a country. And redeeming seeds of change won over noxious weeds. In 1963, I remember I was trying to overcome a 10-hour day at the steam sawmill on Stinking Creek. And I came home and watched JFK's speech. And then there was a sea change in my thinking that night. He had been talking legalese like he was a lawyer when I'd listened to him. This night he said very clearly that I understood him, that discrimination is evil, it's immoral, it's unjust. And I had an epiphany that night. Not only do my friends get mistreated, but it's providentially wrong in the eyes of God. And then in 1963, do you remember in August, the March on Washington? I have a dream. Providence is on the side of non-violent social justice, inclusion. God is on the side of humility, mercy, and love. God is no respecter of persons. My time's up, so I'll say thank you, pioneers. Thank you, planters of redeeming seeds of change. God bless you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Tom. From a historian's perspective, he was just telling us, and he brought in quite a few historical moments in our country. We are now going to have 4 people virtually who are going to be speaking, we hope. And we're going to start off. I'm going to go ahead and read the introductions to all 4 of these people, and then we will play those back on a recording that they've already done. First of all, we've got Dr. Laura Marcus Green and Susan Duplessis, and they are from the Arts Commission. They're going to do a talk on the importance of arts and culture in building community. Now, Dr. Laura Marcus Green, has a PhD as a program specialist for community arts and folk life at the South Carolina Arts Commission, where she collaborates on the Art of Community, Rural South Carolina Initiative, and manages several folk life grant and award programs, conducts statewide outreach and folk life fieldwork, and co-develops special projects with statewide community partners. From 2016 to 2019, Green was also Folk and Traditional Arts Program Director at the University of South Carolina's McKissick Museum, where she developed some programming in conjunction with Folk Life exhibition. She also is currently serving on the advisory committee of the online Journal of Folklore and Education, forthcoming issue with the theme Teaching for Equity, the Role of Folklore in a Time of Crisis and Opportunity, which goes right along with what we're talking about tonight. Susan Duplessis is also at the Arts Commission. She is the Community Arts Development Director for the South Carolina Arts Commission, and she's worked at the intersection of arts and culture and community development for more than 25 years, developing and leading the new initiative called the Art of Community, Royal SC, and its corresponding program, Create Rural SC. She continues to practice listening, learning, and connecting in rural and urban settings. A native South Carolinian with deep family roots in Pickens County, she has a wide range of experience in community building. She grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, where she attended local schools and earned a BA in interdisciplinary studies with a concentration in art from USC Upstate. She is a 2013 Riley Diversity Leaders Initiative Fellow and has been a featured speaker in multiple settings across the state and country. Our third speaker will be Robert or Bob Reeder, and he is going to speak on being neighborly. Bob is a native of Rock Hill, now lives in Columbia. He has served as a program director for Rural LISC since 2005. Bob is a 14-year veteran of Rural LISC and has built a 30-year career devoted to social and economic justice and equity and comprehensive community and economic development. He's a National Charette's Institute Certified Community Facilitator. He helped create the Rural LISC Arts and Culture-based Creative Economic Development Funding Initiative. Bob earned a BA in Government from Wofford and a JD from Vanderbilt University School of Law. And he plays some mean spoons. A lot of hearing. And last, we will have Dr. Aaron Mayer. He will be doing a talk on One South, One America. Aaron Mayer is an epidemiologist in the state of New York. He's also an environmental justice pioneer working in the spaces of health, environment, voting rights, and disparities over the last 40 years. Aaron has served as a 35-year veteran, urban environmental activist, regional and national environmental justice organizer, and strategist from the state of New York. He served as the national president of the Sierra Club and serves now on the national board of directors of the Sierra Club. In the year 2000, he was the Citizen Environmentalist Activist Award recipient. And so please give these people a hand, and we will listen to them virtually.
Good evening, and thank you so much to the Hagood Mill Foundation and all who have worked so hard to make tonight possible. I'm relatively new to South Carolina, but not long after my arrival 4+ years ago, I came to think of Pickens and the surrounding area as a folk life epicenter. I'm so honored to be invited to take part in this special program. Folk and traditional arts are distinguished from other art forms through their rootedness in a shared identity, whether that identity be family, cultural community, town or region, occupation, spiritual practice, and so on. I often think of folk life and traditional arts as an informal education, or to quote literary scholar Kenneth Burke, equipment for living, helping us to know how to navigate the world, whether through hands-on skills like quilting or wood carving, family recipes, songs, ways of celebration, or philosophies of life. At this time, like so many around the country, we are pausing to look around and consider where we are, how we got here, and how to move forward. When Betty McDaniel asked Susan and me to talk about building community through the arts and culture, one of the best examples I could think of sprang from another moment in our shared and global history, the aftermath of the attacks on 9/11, 2001. Then as now, we were thrown into a time of fear, anger, and confusion, intermixed with goodwill, kindness, caring, and hope. Whichever path we chose, it was clear that things would never be the same. In September 2001, I was directing an arts program in a refugee center in Portland, Oregon. I was the lone arts professional in a social service agency that helped people fleeing wartime situations from around the world settle in a new home. My work entailed identifying incoming artists and tradition bearers, assessing their arts-related needs and desires, connecting them with the resources they needed to continue their art forms in a new home, and developing public programs through which these artists and communities could share their arts and heritage with the receiving or host community. As you may know, a refugee is a person who has been forced to leave their country in order to escape war, persecution, or natural disaster. Most of the people with whom I worked had no desire to leave, but were forced to do so because it was no longer safe to stay, in spite of deep ties to their land and homes. I remember Tina Mustafic, a Bosnian weaver, knitter, and crochet artist, who carried around in her purse a Polaroid photograph of her bombed-out house that had been in her family for 600 years. Such deep roots are not unlike the connections described in the readings we have just heard, and no doubt the stories we're about to hear about the Pickens area. In writing about the Liberia community, Mabel Clark noted that the land and people connect through memory and story, and memory and story become the threads tying people to place through time. Over the years, I worked with refugees. Although they came from vastly different places and cultures, there were some common threads I came to recognize. Since people had been uprooted from their homelands, they had to carry their sense of home and belonging with them. Most were only able to travel with 2 suitcases or less, and some had lived in refugee camps for some years before arriving in the US. And many had had to leave home in a hurry. And what do you think they carried with them? I was always struck by this. Musical instruments, handmade linens made by themselves or family members, tools, the things that were most precious to them to plant seeds in a new home, a new life. At one point, I worked with a group of seniors, and when asked what he brought with him from his home country in the way of traditional arts or culture, one gentleman pointed to his head and said, "Mine, it's all up here. My memories and stories that I want to pass on to my grandchildren." I'd like to pause here and ask you to ponder, if you had to leave your home country in a hurry and could only bring 1 or 2 things, what would you take with you? It's worth stopping to think about. The idea for a multicultural sewing circle was a natural for me, as I'm a crocheter and I have belonged to sewing circles myself. I could see that many women were isolated at home and not able to speak English. Some were working, others not. Surely many had handwork traditions they had brought with them from their home. And it seemed like they probably also had the tradition of gathering to do their handwork with family and friends. I think these traditions are universal across cultures, and I know there's a vibrant fiber arts community in Pickens. Over time, we built up the sewing circle, beginning with a Ukrainian cross-stitch embroiderer and an Eritrean basket weaver from the Horn of Africa. Little by little, the circle grew to include Tima, the Bosnian handworker, Valeriana, the Angolan basket weaver. There was Veronique, the Togolese seamstress from a culture where people order custom-made clothing, and Mabi, the Afghani embroiderer from Kandahar, a tricky place to be from after September 11th. And there were others. The sewing circle developed into a little family. The women's children and grandchildren often came with them, giving them rides, serving as interpreters, learning the handwork stitches, and learning to take pride in their elders and cultural traditions. A year or so into the project, we held a town hall meeting and talked about where we wanted to go with the sewing circle. It was time to write a grant to support the project. So the women wanted to share their work and stories with a wider audience, as well as the story of the special family they had created. They wanted to create an exhibition. In my country are words that began so many sentences when people spoke about their homelands. So this was the title of our exhibit and its catalog, which I have here. With the help of interpreters, we conducted group interviews with each of the women, learning about how their handwork traditions figured into their upbringing, their connections with their family, their sense of self-worth as women, and into their lives and transition as refugees. For many of the women, their handwork was a means of cultural and economic survival, helping them weather years in refugee camps and establish life in a new home. And now helping them to build community with each other. So many differences and so many similarities, but across the culture, I think that handwork provided comfort, beauty, and connection. During her interview, Ukrainian embroiderer Anna Petachuk said, "After going to the circle, you feel at ease and it brings you some happiness. It's so nice to get together because we compare experiences, we compare work, and we exchange opinions, and we just communicate as women. Every woman there practices an art of her country, and we become acquainted with the artistic traditions of other countries. You feel really good. You feel like you're in a circle of old friends that you've known forever. And it doesn't matter that you only know a little bit of English. We manage to understand each other. Maybe it's a language of experience and art." As a public program, we invited people from the broader community to come and stitch and visit with the sewing circle. In spite of potential linguistic and cultural barriers, there was an instant recognition of shared passions and talents, a spirit of curiosity, learning, and exchange. There were wonderful encounters among people who would otherwise not have met. Sitting down and stitching together, people found connection and potentially understanding. Strangers built community. I want to close with two favorite quotes about stories. One is, "An enemy is someone whose story you have not heard." This is attributed to Jean Knudsen Hoffman, a Quaker peace activist. And the other is from the time I spent working on the Navajo Nation, where I once heard a Navajo elder observe, "In sharing stories, we become family." So thank you so much for this opportunity to share this story of community building through arts and culture. And I'm happy to hand the program off to my esteemed and cherished colleagues, Susan Duplessis and Bob Breeder, who will bring us back home to South Carolina through their stories. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this important conversation in Pickens tonight. I'm zooming in from my front porch in Columbia, South Carolina, where I live and work. As part of the South Carolina Arts Commission, we're working on community arts development in our state. You've just heard from Laura Marcus Green, my colleague and someone for whom I hold great respect for her work and commitment, not only to our state, but to the practice of engagement through the arts, and in particular, engagement through traditional and folk arts. And while I'm not sitting in Pickens tonight with you, my heart is there with you as you lean forward into this important conversation about who we are and how we are in this amazing state called South Carolina. My own family roots go deep in Pickens. I'm the granddaughter of Jessie Laura Friddle Kennemore and Silas Dean Kennemore, who are my mother's parents and who both stream from people here in the Pickens area from the 1700s. When my family built a house in Dacusville in the 1980s, it was just down the street from the rubble of an old corner store at the corner of Little Pond Road and Shoals Creek Church Road. On my grandmother's first visit, she recounted having ridden to that store on horseback, holding tight to her grandfather. That would have been in the early 1900s. The Friddle family, her family, had settled in Peters Creek, just a couple of miles from my newly built home and from that corner store. For me, it was one of those aha moments where you realize how connected you are to a place through generations. And sometimes we have the good fortune to have a grandparent who can share those stories and memories with us. I was that fortunate. If I were to name this short presentation tonight, I would call my part the complexities of people, place, and family, and the ties that bind us. It's been my great fortune to work for a state agency, the South Carolina Arts Commission, that's given me the latitude to explore our state, our places, and the stories of our people, and consider what it is that binds us. We call our program the Art of Community Rural SC, and we've been working strategically for the last 5 years to engage communities in a process that's about identifying our assets, our treasures, our local stories, and places that have deep meaning to us. It's also about how we consider our challenges as a community, whether it's in the healthcare arena, in education, or economic development. But mostly, this initiative is about building relationships with people and between people and place. I'm happy to say that we have 14 counties plus the Catawba Indian Nation participating with us in this deep exploration of who we are in South Carolina and how we connect with one another. I'm especially happy to say that Pickens County is one of those counties where we're going deep. We're doing that with the help of people like Betty McDaniel and her husband Ed, Danielle Yother, who is helping us connect with a creative and entrepreneurial community, and artist leaders like Ellen Kachansky, who is serving as a mentor for creative thinking, inspiration, and design. As we explore our state, our ideas, our stories, we're going places. At least we were going places until the pandemic. Last year, in fact, we brought a group of about 20 folks representing the 6 low country counties to Pickens on a field trip. And I'd like to share the story of the field trip with you tonight. We came, we explored, we shared. From the Hagood Mill to the new coffee shop in downtown Pickens to Holly Springs Center out in the country, we shared stories about our traditions and our places. We played together. We reflected together. What I believe was especially important about this field trip was that we were able to share an experience. That experience was place-based and rich, based on the arts, culture, history, natural features, and most of all, on the people we met. We traveled to the Pickens Senior Center and saw evidence of engagement through arts, culture, and traditions like quilting and needlework. It reminded us all that many of us share similar traditions and stories, wherever we're from, of grandmothers and great-grandmothers who loved their communities and their families. These quilts, that needlework, they tell that story. Our group, made up mostly of people of color, enjoyed a Friday evening at Aunt Sue's restaurant on Highway 11, just below Table Rock. It was delicious, and for me, the first time I'd ever had frog legs. And I'm not sure, but the occasion might have been another first. When someone heard we had a singer in our group, she was invited to join the band, which had been playing traditional bluegrass and country music. There was a moment considering what she might sing that the band knew, and it was decided that Ode to Billy Joe was it. When she faltered in remembering all the lyrics, because you know it's a long ballad, someone in the crowded restaurant passed their cell phone, hand by hand, over the heads of about 100 people there, all wanting to hear more. And with that gesture, we knew we were sharing a special moment. And as our singer, Glisha Jordan, sang with a local band, she brought down the house. Just a few miles from Aunt Sue's is Illinois Community Center. It's known for its Friday night jams. For anyone that doesn't know, this is where people come together with their banjos and fiddles to play together, young and old, much like I imagine my ancestors might have done. We were clearly not from this place, but we came with interest and openness to the possibility of what the experience would bear. Just being part of the practice of a living tradition there made us think of the music traditions where we're from and how this informal gathering keeps those traditions alive for all generations. Later that evening, we were invited to a local business, the Ale House, where some of us began to jam with some local musicians and create a new experience that linked us from the Low Country to the Upstate. Experiencing Pickens County, the countryside, the mountains, the waterfalls, made such an impression on many of our young travelers who had never seen this part of South Carolina. Connections were made between the Rensing Center and some of our photographers who fell in love with the serenity and nature there. We began to think about the diversity of our state in terms of geography and topography, how close we are in many ways, how different in others. Our experience included hearing the story of Mabel Clark of Soapstone Baptist Church, how she and a few others continue to hold on to this place so full of her family's story, where her family and others are buried on this hill where her church sits. Even though we are separated by things like geography and county lines, by history and stories that want to divide us, we're learning that by being together and sharing our cultures, from food to music to needlework, we have so much more in common than not. And that's what binds us as a people of this complicated and beautiful South Carolina. It's a beginning, a place for knowing one another better and asking, what do these moments have to teach us? And that's where we are, who we are, and what I believe our opportunity is: to listen, to learn, grow, and share together. Thank you very much.
Good evening to Pickens, South Carolina, to you in the audience, and to the other distinguished program presenters. I want to thank Hagood Mill for inviting me to participate in this remarkable event. Betty, Billy, Katie, your board and volunteers, and all the other team members that helped make this such a special place. I'm so thrilled to be in Pickens. I'm so thrilled to be back in Pickens, if only virtually, to be among friends, both old and new. Hello, Ed, Josh, Errol Wayne. I, for one, will be more than happy to be able to see you in person. When Betty first asked me to speak about neighborliness, my first reaction was to defer. What can I say to folks who have been neighbors and who have had neighbors all of their lives that they do not already know or have experienced? And what exactly is neighborliness anyway? She still thought I had something to share. I told her that I would share honestly some examples from my own unique story that perhaps would touch upon this thing called neighborliness, or what it truly means for us to be good neighbors. One thing I've come to understand is that my being able to be here is a result of the collective effort of love and sacrifice going back generations. I stand on the shoulders of all those who prayed for my survival before they even knew me. Native cultures speak of 7 generations in both directions. 7 generations ago, an ancestor prayed for me. Now I must do the same for my descendants living 7 generations from now. I was born and raised in Rock Hill, South Carolina, the eldest son of Dicey May McCullough Reeder and Robert E. Lee Reeder. Yep, you heard that correctly. More about my father's birth name later. On my father's side, I am the grandson of Rachel Elizabeth Alexander Thompson Reeder and Reverend John Alfred Reeder, and the great-grandson of Rachel Alexander Reeder and John Robert Reeder. On my mother's side, I'm the grandson of Dina May Neal McCullough and Reverend John Robert McCullough, and the great-grandson of Dicey Neal McCullough and John Daniel McCullough. Without them, there would be no John Robert Bob Reeder speaking to you tonight. These are indeed strange times. To some, even hard times. We often hear folks remark that we are indeed living in a new normal. But to our ancestors and to their neighbors, stranger and much harder times were their old normal all along. My grandfather, Papa, who had been born in 1878, among other things, was a storyteller. But Papa's stories were always carried messages of a time that to me at 8, 9, 10, or 12, he died when I was 13, were scary, and it was hard for me to understand their meaning. But every evening at supper, and we called it supper, not dinner, at supper, after our pre-meal Bible verses, and after the meal had been eaten and the table cleared, Papa would hold court. We looked forward to hearing those stories. And during that time, even my father became a son again. One such story was about a family of sharecroppers during the Great Depression who were living those hard times, and perhaps who unintentionally practiced neighborliness. The family hardly had enough to eat, especially meat, but they had one large hog shoulder hanging in the back corner of their shack. The little boy of the family kept wondering why his mother and father never brought down that shoulder so they could finally get enough to eat. One day he got up the courage to ask his mother why they never cooked the shoulder. "Why, son," she replied, "we are saving that shoulder for Mr. Hard Times, because he is surely gonna come." Well, one day the young boy was saw a stooped old man in tattered, dusty clothes walking slowly barefoot down the dirt road in front of their shack. The boy said hello to the old man, and when the old man asked him, he told the old man his name. The young boy then asked the old man his name. The old man sighed wearily and said, "Son, I guess you can just call me Mr. Hard Times." Remembering what his mother had said, the young boy couldn't believe what was happening. Mr. Hard Times had finally come. The boy told the stranger to wait. He had something to give him. The boy rushed inside, pulled down the shoulder, and excitedly handed it to the old stranger. That evening, when the boy's mother and father returned from the cotton field, the father noticed the shoulder was missing. The father immediately became alarmed that the shoulder had been stolen and asked the young boy if he had noticed any strangers around the property that day. The young boy replied, "I did see a strange old man. He told me his name was Mr. Hard Times, so I gave him the shoulder we had been saving for him." That's how my grandfather ended the story, leaving me to ponder the joke, if there was one, or whatever was the message of the story. Perhaps the message was we should practice neighborliness in the midst of hard times, and that no matter how bad we think we have it, there will always be those who have it far worse. Now, I did try to find a few official points of reference of what it means to be neighborly, just to provide context. And I started with the Bible and found several verses simply just to share. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. That was in Galatians. Keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without even knowing it. That was in Hebrews. The commandments: you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other command there may be, are summed up in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. That was in Romans. Now, Webster's defines neighborly as, quote, as or befitting a good or friendly neighbor, friendly, helpful, unquote. We're talking now about neighborliness in hard times and polarized times. We have more in common than we think. We are more alike than we know. My papa always used to repeat the saying that a house divided cannot stand. My mother would always tell us kids over and over to never hate, even in the face of hatefulness directed towards us, because hate, as she put it, hardened the heart, slowing the blood flow, and was the greatest corrupter of not only the soul and spirit, but also of physical health. I have a couple of quick stories, and I think I will have to be quiet. My time is running. When I was much younger, I let both my hair and beard grow long. So this ain't really long, trust me. My hair was almost to my waist. Even my own family thought I had lost my ever-loving mind. This was before the current fad of folks growing long hair for stylish reasons. But anyway, one day while driving with a friend on I-20 between Columbia, South Carolina and Athens, Georgia, my car engine died just outside of Columbus, Georgia. It was hot. We were stranded. Cars kept whizzing by. No one would stop for what seemed like an eternity. Then on the other side of the median, an old pickup truck slowed and stopped. There was a Confederate flag across the entire back window of the truck's cab. A white guy with long blonde hair got out of the truck holding up a gas can and shouted across the din of the speeding cars and trucks, "Rasta man, you need some help?" I told him thanks and let him go on his way since I needed a lot more than gas. But the point was the offer of help, of neighborliness. Almost immediately after the truck pulled off, a car pulled up behind me filled with young kids back from a Little League game driven by their coach. I would call him Ronnie to protect his privacy. Ron was also white. After pronouncing my car Dade, He offered to help tow it to the nearest exit, which he did. He also offered to drive us the 60 miles to Athens, Georgia, which he also did, even though I told him I had no money. But I would send him a check as soon as I got paid, which I did. One Sunday afternoon, while taking my younger brother back to college in Spartanburg, my mother, who by that time was a nurse, and my father noticed a car swerving dangerously ahead of them. My father remarked that they should speed up and go around the car. My mother responded that something did not look right. My father replied that the driver was probably drunk and not to worry about it. Right about then, the car left the road, crossed the sidewalk, and crashed into a wrought iron fence. My parents stopped, rushed over to the car. The driver, who happened to be white, was in the middle of a heart attack. They gently pulled him out, and my mother gave him CPR until the paramedics arrived. The paramedics told her that the man would have died had she not given him the CPR. Growing up on the red clay dirt road outside of Rock Hill, I experienced many examples of neighborliness. The courtesy we had to practice and not eavesdrop on others on the party line we shared. My grandmother Rachel baking cakes for and taking eggs or a jar of whatever she had canned to any neighbor who was sick and shut in. She would always take me along. And finally, as my time expires, I want to share a little bit of a different story about neighborliness. It's a little bit painful, but it's a story of watching my grandfather and another fairly well-off neighbor who lived at the top of our hilly dirt road, above our garden and through the woods, deal as men and neighbors with what could have been a very tricky situation. Apologies in advance to anyone this story may offend. The story is not one of condoning animal cruelty, rather it highlights the shared understanding between neighbors of the survival realities of living in hard times. One night after supper, I heard what my grandfather called a commotion coming from the chicken coop. My father turned on the back porch light, and my grandfather picked up his double-barrel shotgun, thinking either a chicken hawk or a weasel, maybe even a fox were attacking the chickens. As our eyes adjusted, we saw our top-of-the-hill neighbor's German Shepherd leaving the coop, jumping our garden fence, and running back home up through the woods. We could see several dead hens and crushed eggs strewn about the coop. Papa, who always called me simply "you boy," told me to put on my shoes and a jacket and to come with him. He had work to do. He knocked on the neighbor's door. When the neighbor opened it, smiling at seeing us, Papa simply said this was a business visit. Your dog was in my chicken coop. He killed a bunch of my chickens and sucked my eggs. You know that we cannot have that. I'm just here man to man to let you know that if it happens again and I catch him, I will have no choice but to kill him. Both men nodded and shook hands. A month or so later, we heard the beginning of a commotion in the chicken coop. Papa, who was an avid hunter and crack shot, grabbed the shotgun and hit the dog full bore as it was leaping back across the garden fence. Again, he told me to put on my shoes and to come with him. We had business to attend to. We had the business of men to attend to. He knocked on the neighbor's door and said, I'll never forget this, said, John, I am so sorry, but I had to kill your dog. The neighbor thanked him for letting him know. And again, they nodded and shook hands. Thank you all for allowing me to share.
Greetings. Welcome everyone to Hagood Mill for this wonderful series that they're doing with regards to building awareness in light of the troubling times that we as a nation, a community, a state are feeling. My name is Aaron Mayer. I am the descendant of Barry Mackenzie and Caroline Hagood. I am one of the many thousands that are spread across this country whose home is here at Hagood Mill. And I bid you all welcome to this conversation about seeds of change, growth, survival, and a conversation of family and place, but more importantly, as one of the discussion pieces that were put out there. How do we blossom and grow from this place and space of what once was a slave plantation to building a community of hope and a vision on how we can come together? This is an important and timely conversation in these times. My ancestor, the son of Barry and Caroline McKenzie, his name was Zion McKenzie. And I loved his name, and our family treasures his name, not only in the sense of its uniqueness in its biblical sense, but also symbolically what the name means. In fact, Zion was the community in which Israel, the hill in Israel, in which they built Jerusalem. It was the highest point. But also for Christians, it is that heavenly city, the kingdom of heaven. And so my ancestor Zion, when he left from Hagood Mill in the 1870s and settled into what is now the Golden Grove community in Travelers Rest, South Carolina, he took the family on that spiritual journey as the children of Israel from a place with a legacy of blood, toil, and suffering to actually building a new community in a new place, in a new space, but also exercising something that had been long denied them for generations, that right of liberty and self-expression and growth and laboring for one's own good and not laboring under the burden for someone else's. And that's what I think is unique. But Zion also, in his teachings, through the family and through faith, was how do we build a better community? How do we build a stronger family? How do we build resilience? And more importantly, contribute to that broader vision of equity and inclusion, regardless of your race and background. It's been a little over 150 years since my ancestors have left this place. I know that the brochure puts next to my name, descendants of slaves or slaved in here. But my family was enslaved. Slavery is not a natural condition for human beings. Slavery is when one takes away the liberty of others and the freedom of others and the human capital and mental capital of others and exploit that, for their own gain and their own growth and their benefit at the expense of those who are enslaved. So we have this notion of place and space when we talk about the founding fathers of the town and the legends of this very community, but we divorce them in the modern sense from the conditions that gave them that power, that wealth, and that place and standing. And one of the things that we've been doing for every 2 years is coming together, descendants of those who were enslaved and the descendants of those who enslaved my ancestor, to explore these questions of family, of where we are today in that arc of history that's personal and intimate to us. But how do we build a new conversation? How do we come together as one, not in fear of the past, but those descendants who wish to explore that past, atone for the horrors and the suffering and pain, but come together with one shared mutual destiny that we all reckon that as American citizens, as the common humanity that the Bible tells us that we have, to really build and grow that. So for the past few years, we have begun those seeds of hope, those seeds of love, those seeds of tears, recognizing the suffering, the seeds of genuine compassion. And I know that our ancestors, looking down from their earthly heaven and skies, that kingdom in heaven, is saying this generation is really struggling to grapple with those questions. And granted, we have been doing an intimate journey as the descendants of those who were Ben Hagood and the descendants of Barry and Caroline McKenzie, grappling with that question, but we've been having that amongst ourselves, and we feel that now at this particular hour in our nation's hour of need, that we can share and openly share some of that struggle of course, sometimes it gets raggedy. By raggedy, I mean, not everything's going to be perfect. There's not a word for everything. Sometimes it's just raw emotion. But the deeper love and humanity that drives both of our families and that we all share of anything intimate with family, how do we reach beyond the pain and suffering and turmoil that families endure, but still come together as one family? You cannot say that between the slave master or the slaveholder and the slave that there is no connection. No, we are bound by this place. Hagood Mill, the Hagood Plantation, was a unique place and period in American history. It exposed some of the deepest, darkest gaps and deficiencies and failures in our constitutional democracy. Our condition, in fact, some of the early struggles beginning right here in South Carolina, the state of South Carolina, where the Civil War began, but also the earliest battle for liberty and freedom began. And it began with the Stonewall Rebellion just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. And it was led by an Angolan slave named Jimmy. And the chant that they were chanting in their fight for freedom and liberty was that of their freedom and moving from the bondage of slavery. Granted, the rebellion was one of many of countless eruptions in the early Americas, but for some reason, we like the rebellion that occurred in what we call the Boston Massacre in 1770 with the death of Crispus Attucks. Now that, for some reason, everybody can rally around because that what gave rise to the birth of our nation of the United States of America. But even then, the same resounding cries in that massacre were the cries of liberty and freedom. And in the birthing this nation, and when this nation became free after a massive American Revolutionary War and rebellion in which blacks and white, free and slave, fought, we still carved out a notion of humanity for whites and then African Americans being 3/5. It has been since that original sin, since the founding of our republic, we have struggled with the conditions and the questions over race, power, class, and heritage. So the question is, how do we bring the conversation to full circle? Well, we can look at the end of the Civil War, which was a clear break in which Abraham Lincoln talked about at the Gettysburg Address, our new birth, our new freedom. But we still had to fight another 100 years from 1865 to 1965 to realize that. In fact, there were perhaps members in the Hagood family and their descendants that were part of the struggle. And there were perhaps those who believe, as some believe to this day, in the legacy of what was the Confederacy. And unfortunately, we recognize to this day that legacy, that notion, that sense of heritage, because the word heritage has a lot of power, can be warped. And with words, we can gloss over or paper over things. And the word heritage, in which United Warriors of the Confederacy, which they convert to their lost cause, they wrapped a lot of the trappings and symbols and slogans of our nation's ugly past and South Carolina's deep, dark heritage and connection with slavery. Now, granted, the notion of heritage in some people's sense is a flag and some of the monuments that we see that are being taken down. And yes, it's caused a huge conversation in our country. And some are saying rhetorically, will it result in every monument taken down? My point is, step away from that and step to really, when we talk about what heritage means. And the heritage is one that we need to really dig into. And our shared heritage here at this plantation was a human condition that the Lord in the book of Genesis laid out with regards to children of Israel struggling against Egypt and leaving the bondage of Egypt and finding the great city of Jerusalem and finding God's commandments with regards to his faith and covenants with them in their land that they would be free. In that symbolism, in finding that emancipation, we recognize, even from our biblical teachings, that slavery is not the natural state of any human being, and that good Christians and people of all faiths struggle for their freedom and liberty. And here, even in this place and space, the notion of heritage and the notion of faith are incongruent. We cannot talk about a heritage that talks about the inequality and the lesser of one human being vis-a-vis another. When we know that the Lord, if we're talking about a kingdom of heaven in which we're all elevated and lifted up, or as my ancestor Zion, when he went to create the Golden Grove community in Travelers Rest, to find that expression of freedoms, that we are all included at God's table and the table of creation for all humanity, for the protection of all humanity. This place and space and this notion of heritage, you know, as they say, is the one, in my opinion, that is the proper vision, but not trapped in some battle flag or some monuments. In fact, if those monuments cause the pain and lift up that which was the evil, then we must replace them. We must step away from them. In fact, we must sow the seeds of new monuments and of a new vision to come. And that new vision, I think, begins with the conversation that you're going to hear over today and tomorrow, but hopefully not stop here. You know, that we continue this conversation that tries to pull us together. You know, it's really interesting. Dr. Martin Luther King, in his letter from a Birmingham jail, had a particular section in it talking about the inescapable mutuality of all mankind, and of all humanity, in which he said, in the sense that, you know, all people are caught in this network of inescapable mutuality. This mutuality is what binds us as humans and our humanity. And we're tied together in a single garment of destiny. So the heritage of America must be an inclusive heritage. We cannot disown which was the past, but we also must move forward to a better promise of tomorrow, the heritage left by Dr. King and many countless abolitionists and those who fought for freedom and liberty. But he recognized that whatever affects one affects us all. So we cannot talk about people apart from one another, but we must come together. And that he pointed out that our democracy and our civil society could not be perfected without recognizing and lifting up the humanity in all people. And he came to the realization that he could never be what he was destined to be if the people he struggled with were not able to elevate themselves and rise to what they were destined to be. And that we're all caught in this shared web of mutuality in which we must lift up one another and tear one another down. Sadly, Dr. King was assassinated, and folks felt that with the progress and struggles from the 64 Voting Rights Act, 65 Civil Rights Act, all the way up to the election of America's first African-American president, that we were beyond these things. But on June 17th, 2015, Dylan Ruth, a young man, current generation, reaching into the old poisons of heritage, brought us back to that reality that there are those who had that deep-seated belief that we're not equal. And he massacred 9 individuals in Charleston. And it's one of those things that, you know, we must recognize that we must rise above that kind of evil and come together. So these symbols of flags are more than just looking at a flag or looking at a Confederate statue. We must now look to the teachings of our Creator, look to our beautiful constitutional democracy, and find those places and voices where we can come together as one people, as one humanity, or as we're doing here at Hagood Mill, as one unique family. Our history, our destinies are shared, they're inescapable, and they define us. I hope you do enjoy your visit and the conversation today and tomorrow. Welcome.
What an honor it is to have these folks in our intellectual and physical community, and we're sorry that they couldn't be here with us in person. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists that were awesome enough to come and join us today. Unfortunately, County Administrator Ken Roper couldn't make it, but here we have to the left, Dr. Kathy McKenzie Mitiku. Is that correct? She was the Director of Auditing for the City of Winston-Salem, North Carolina for nearly 30 years. Upon retirement, she edited for several academic journals as well as managed the family businesses. Kathy currently serves on the Hagood Mill Foundation board. She is descendant of the Hagood family and proud to serve the community. Thank you for being here, Kathy. Gary Hagood Brightwell, the beautiful woman in blue, is a native of Pickens, South Carolina, and a descendant of the Hagood family. She currently lives with her husband Charlie in Walterboro, South Carolina, where she has been, but now retired, a director of the Colleton, did I pronounce that right? Colleton Museum and Farmers Market, a maven for the Rural Arts Initiative for South Carolina Arts Commission, and president of the Colleton County Arts Council. Most recently, Gary has been the Hagood family historian and has written a book on sale in the Mercantile titled Hagood Mill, A History of a Place and Its People. All the proceeds from the sale of this book go to support the Hagood Mill Foundation. Get your copy today. Thank you, Gary, for this labor of love. State Representative Davey Hyatt was born in 1960 and graduated from Pickens High in 1978. He also graduated Central Wesleyan College in 1983. He is married to Lisa Clamp, and they have 2 grown children, Lander and Sally. He's the proud granddad of 2 granddaughters, Ruby Lynn, 2 years, and Marianne, 2 months old. Davey also is a member of Rotary and has served as deacon at the First Baptist Church of Pickens. He's the owner of Hyatt Printing Company and was elected to the South Carolina House of Representatives in 2004. Thank you, Davey, for being here. Mayor Fletcher Perry, Mayor of Pickens, is a man with a true servant spirit. He has exhibited this selfless and thoughtful service in so many ways since his return to his hometown after a successful career in the U.S. Army of 42 years. Serving 12 years on city council led him up to becoming the first black mayor in our county's history. Concurrently, Fletcher has run small businesses, giving opportunities for work and serving the community. Thank you, Mayor Perry, for being here. I look forward to our panel discussion, and I will pass the torch to Joshua Johnson, who will be our moderator, and do the question and answer session.
It's an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you here this evening. And with all of you, those are our panelists here this evening. I'm going to try to get in the microphone here, maybe turn it just a little bit so I don't have to turn my back towards you. But we have a few questions here, and the way we'll go through the questions is I'll ask each of you one question at a time, and as we're going through, you might come with some additional ideas and some additional thoughts, and so we'll be looking forward to your answers and how we can further this discussion. And we live here in the Pickens community. And it's amazing to me, even here in Pickens, we have our smaller communities. And I think, a lot of our discussion can be based around that. How do we get a central community around our multiple smaller communities? I live in Pumpkin Town. I don't see a lot of people. I feel like I'm so distanced from the city of Pickens. My parents moved from Pumpkin Town, and they live in Pickens now, so that's actually connected me more with the goings-on in Pickens. Going to Pickens High School, you always feel a little bit further out because the city kids know each other a lot better, and I think that's an interesting point to be able to connect our smaller communities together within our larger community that is Pickens and Pickens County. Mayor Perry, I would like to start with you. Would you briefly introduce yourself, your position, and any notable experiences that you have had that have helped you deal with the current racial issues?
My name is James Fletcher Perry. I was born here in Pickens in 1954. I was born in a little 4-room house at 522 West Lee Street. My mother still resides today at 88 years old. the 4-room house was, a 2-bedroom was added to it to include a bathroom, so initially it did not have a bathroom, it had what's called an outside toilet. I went to Pickens County Training School for 6 years. It was a segregated school right near Griffin Ebenezer Baptist Church. The principal there was Principal Selby Anderson, who was from Liberty. My first grade teacher was Miss Evans, second and third grade teacher, Miss A.B. Gazaway. My fourth grade teacher was Miss Grant. And my fifth and sixth grade teacher was the principal, Mr. Selby Anderson. Miss Howland did some teaching in the fifth grade. I say that because those years in elementary school really formed a foundation for me to be where I'm at today. In 1966, the school was destroyed by fire, and we were bused to Rosewood Elementary School in Liberty. And every day we were bused, we went by Pickens Elementary School. And at one, never did I ask the question, why can't I go to that school? I just followed the tradition that I was in a classroom, that I looked around with everybody looked like me. And so I was very comfortable. But in 1966 and 67, I attended Pickens Junior High School, which was on Cedar Rock Street. And that was a very different atmosphere. I went from looking at kids that looked like me in the classroom to looking around, and I was the only kid in the classroom that looked like me, okay? And I can tell you I can't tell you how Mr. Clore explained that was the first year that I felt like I had made a bad decision, because each day I was confronted, or the 7 of us was confronted with racial slurs. It seemed like there was no help in sight. It was not until in high school that the schools fully integrated, that they closed the high school in Clearview and Easley, and all the students that had been bused to Easley, they came to Pickens High School. And we went from being a minority in the classrooms to somewhat of a majority, because there were more of us there. So that made us feel a little bit more comfortable, okay? So having been through that process, and then having the opportunity to join the United States Army, and I spent 20 years and 15 days, not 22, 42, but that galvanized the courage to really come back to Pickens, because there was no other place that I wanted to return to but Pickens, South Carolina. And it was because those years in high school that I was able to attend Boyd State, and some of my classmates that really had compassion, they had a conscience, and I could tell that they were raised in a manner in which their parents taught them to be not somewhat colorblind, but to treat everybody like they would want to be treated.
Thank you. Next we have Davey Hyatt. Would you also introduce
Yourself and your position, and any notable experiences that you could describe as well?
Thank you. Is that on? Is it on? Thank you very much for having us here tonight, and it's an honor for me to sit on the panel with these 3 distinguished people here. I don't know that I bring anything to the table, but I can sit and listen and learn from these 3 here. I guess I had the distinct honor and the privilege. I was born and raised in Pickens, the only place I've ever lived. And so I grew up, I guess I'm younger than the rest of them up here. So all that integration and all the racial issues and all that were taken care of before I came along. And I went to school where everybody got along with each other. I mean, we honestly, I've told this story many times, being around Mayor Perry. Some of my best friends were black. We played basketball together every Sunday afternoon over at Griffin Ebenezer Field. I mean, over at the park over there, and played basketball. I was the slow white guy that couldn't jump. They needed a 10th guy so they could have a 5-on-5, and they would call me and ask me to come play. But I thank my mom and dad who taught me that there is no color. My mom and dad always taught me that you should treat everybody the same. I can specifically remember my dad, who was the editor of the newspaper here in Pickens for over 40 years, telling me story after story of a white water fountain and a black water fountain. And he took a gentleman up to Lewis Cafe one day, and Mr. Lewis came out and says, my dad says, this gentleman's thirsty, he's hot, he needs something to drink. And Mr. Lewis said, Mr. Hyatt says, I can't serve him at the front door. If you bring him around to the back, I'll give him a ginger ale. My dad told that story and said, son, we don't need any more of that. And so he never really had to hammer that into me. My mom and dad always showed that to me by the way they lived, because they always treated everybody the same, no matter who they were. We've had people in our house that I had no idea that were black, that they were sitting at the table with us eating. And I had no idea who they were, but they were friends of mom and dad's. They'd come over for dinner, or they'd just drop by to say hello or something. And so I was very blessed that I guess I haven't really seen major racial issues. I mean, I haven't faced the things that Mayor Perry's faced. I haven't faced the things that you folks are going to talk about in just a minute, because I came along at a time when most of that was kind of behind us. I mean, sure, it still took place. I mean, there was still some of it. You knew it was there, but I was always taught you didn't participate in it. That wasn't the way you did things. And so I'm very thankful and very blessed that my parents taught me that, and I've tried to instill that in my children, that there is no color. I mean, everybody's the same. Everyone's equals in God's eyes. And there's coming a day that we're going to be held accountable for that when we stand before God Almighty. And He's going to ask us, how did you treat other people? Because He spells it out in His Word that you're supposed to treat everybody the same. Everybody's created equal in His eyes. So we're going to be held accountable for that for one day. And so I fail miserably, but I thank God every day that my parents taught me that there is no difference in color. There is no black, there is no white, there's no green, there is no yellow. That everyone is the same in God's eyes, and only by the grace of God are who you are where you are. And that's kind of where I was taught growing up, and I'm thankful for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Gary Brightwell. Would you mind introducing yourself and describing some situations that have helped you deal with the current racial issues?
My name is Gary Hagood Brightwell. I'm a descendant of Benjamin Hagood and his son James Earl Hagood, who built or supervised the building of the current mill, and who owned 12 Mile Plantation just up the road. I certainly could not say anything more eloquently than the speakers and the ones on video did before this moment. I was a child of the 60s. I graduated from high school, Pickens High School, in 1968. And as we all know, lots of things were happening in the 60s and into the 70s. We didn't have a large black population in Pickens, and so my experience with black people was pretty limited until in 1967 an integrated class came into my 11th grade, and it was a small number, and Fletcher and I talked about this earlier. I didn't remember any problems, although I'm sure there were utterances that I didn't hear. But things seemed to have gone pretty well. But then all I had to do was go home at night and turn on the news and see black people being hosed with fire hoses, being attacked by police dogs, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., the assassination of Kennedy made a huge impression. And so I became aware of the world around me and the inequities that were there. And I'm sure, as I think about that now, it was a child's version of feeling like this isn't fair and this isn't right. And that was encouraged by my parents, who also taught me not to see color. But through my life, I've worked with other people of different ethnicities, and one of the turning points for me has happened fairly recently. We heard Aaron Mayer speak so eloquently as the last speaker on the video, and he contacted me, 3 or 4 years ago, about his ancestor, Zion McKinney, and the fact that he had traced it down to that Barry McKinney, his father, was a slave of my third great-grandfather, Benjamin Hagood. And we set up a correspondence back and forth, sharing information, and he invited me to come to the reunion, the Mackenzie reunion, Mackenzie Hagood reunion. And I came, I didn't really know what to expect, and I have to admit I was a bit nervous about it. But it was a beautiful, beautiful experience as we put flowers on the graves of the slaves, which are adjacent to Hagood Cemetery, where my ancestors and my parents are buried. And Aaron did a special prayer over the grave of Benjamin Hagood, the slaveholder who had enslaved his ancestor. And so we've continued to work together. In fact, Aaron came down from New York to visit me in Walterboro, South Carolina, where I live. And I shared all the information I possibly could about what I knew about the enslaved persons who were owned by Benjamin Hagood, and we started a great friendship. And for that, I'm very thankful, and it has made me much more sensitive to issues that I didn't even realize that I wasn't being sensitive to. I think it's all about communication. I think we need to learn to talk to each other. And as soon as you work with or have a black friend or a Chinese friend or whatever it is, it takes some of the fear and angst out of it. Prejudice comes from fear. And if we learn to overcome that and see that we're all people, we're all God's people, it makes a real difference.
Lastly, on this first question, we come to Kathy Middicue. If you would, as well, introduce yourself and your position and describe these same notable experiences.
Hi, I'm Kathy Mackenzie Mitiku, and I'm from northern South Carolina, otherwise known as North Carolina. I distinctly remember when I was probably 3-ish or so, burning crosses in our field with men in white robes. I also remember my mom saying, "Be quiet, girl. If you see anybody you know, don't say a word. You never saw them. Just be quiet." I remember also when I was in middle school, selling Girl Scout cookies. And one neighbor would say, "Girl, I don't want no black cookies." "Well, ma'am, we've got shortbread cookies." Because I was naive. I didn't know any better. And she would repeat to me, "Girl, I don't want black cookies." "Oh, we have lemon drop cookies too." And finally, I got the hint. "I don't want black cookies." "Yes, ma'am." So I left. Then came high school. Well, actually before then, 3rd grade. My life was turned upside down when desegregation occurred. I attended every single school in Lee County, North Carolina, because of desegregation. I don't know how that happened, but it happened. And I think it made me a stronger, more resilient person as a result of that. In high school, my senior year, there was this young man of the other persuasion who said to me, "You know, it's time to apply to schools." And I said, yeah. And he said, "I'm applying to Duke." "Oh, but you don't need to apply to Duke because you won't get in." Woo. That kind of struck me the wrong way, being a little country girl, somebody telling me what to do. I thought about it a second, and I ran home and applied to Duke. February rolls around. I'm in. Oh, that same God said, "No need turning in an acceptance letter. You won't graduate." Needless to say, I thought about that too, because that was a bit more challenging and a more comprehensive decision that I needed to make because it affected a lot of people. But I only thought about it long enough to seal the envelope and say, "I'm coming." 4 years later, I graduated from Duke University, May 5th, 1985, and he graduated from the other university in blue down the street on 15501. I'm not calling that school's name. So needless to say, the burning crosses, my mom telling me to be quiet, you see but you don't see, the Girl Scout cookie lady, and the gentleman that I now realize was probably a racist, all planted seeds in my head. They were seeds that taught me how to use a pen as my weapon, because I will never be the one out front protesting, because my mother said, "Be quiet." Be quiet. You see, but you don't see. So my weapon today is my pen. My weapon today is my mouth, participating in events like this, hoping for change.
Thank you very much.
Listening to all the panelists, even on just this first question, has been very enlightening, and I hope everybody is getting a lot out of it. And as has been mentioned, communication, writing, spoken word, reaching out to our communities, to our friends, those we don't know yet, and just connecting and realizing that one can be more compassionate. And also, one of the things that I heard and noted was that it was also somebody that passed down to each of the individuals. And maybe something for us to take note as well is that what are we passing down, as individuals? Let's go to the second question. We'll start again with Mayor Perry. From your perspective, how can we honor our Southern culture and the heritage, but also remain respectful of others' beliefs and feelings about the same Southern culture and heritage?
I think what we do first is we continue doing what we're doing today. We have communication, we have dialogue, and sometimes the questions or the answers of what we talk about can be uncomfortable, okay? When we talk about keeping a heritage, when I look at my community, Joshua crossed the Jordan River. He talked about leaving a monument to indicate there was a crossing there at that particular time. When I look at my community, there is no set place or monument or document or something says that people of color were here. What we have in my community is a red dot store. We have instances where drug has devastated a community. We don't have those things that people can be proud of. And when that happens, people lose a ray of hope. And when that hope is gone, it's hard to rejuvenate or get people to even participate in this. So what can we do? The city of Pickens is about 14% African American. That means it's about 81% white. So it's going to take people like Davey, Ms. Hagood, people who have a conscience, people who have some concern, people who have compassion to say something is wrong, okay? There was a time when in the neighborhood where I'm from where there was some camaraderie, there were people there that loved the community. But over time, because those people were not made to feel a part of the community, that was lost. Okay, so to keep a Southern heritage, if you want to keep a monument, if you want to keep a place like Tillman Hall, if you want to keep flying a rebel flag, then I think people of the majority needs to have some compassion to say, what can we do to bring up the mindset and the thought that, yes, there's been a group of people that have been left off or left out of the net, whether physically, morally, financially, whatever. I think until we can find something concrete to show a heritage for those of color, then it's going to be difficult for those people to see that, okay, there is a Southern heritage that talks about maybe a monument or a hall or something. It's going to be difficult.
Thank you.
Mr. Hyatt?
I was waiting for you to give me the nod. I think the key to it, is that we we don't try to erase history, we try to learn from it. I think a lot of times we spend a lot of our energy just trying to erase things, when we ought to be spending a lot of that energy trying to change things and trying to learn from it and not repeat some of the things that happened. I think that's a big issue. And I'm going to go back to one of the things you said in your introduction about being from the metropolis of Pumpkin Town. You know, we live in a different society than we once did, where people are transient. I mean, you know, Mayor Perry and I, we used to could walk into the post office and know everybody in there in Pickens. And now you walk in there and you might know half the people in there. People are moving into your communities. People are moving into Pumpkin Town. They're moving into Dacusville. They're moving into Liberty. They're moving in all over this county because of what we offer here. I mean, my travels across this state as a state representative, I hear it all the time. You know, you live in God's country. You live in the greatest place in the world. And I don't deny that. I'm the first one to say, yeah, we do. You keep enjoying where you are, you leave us alone. But people want to get here. We have something to offer. And people are getting here in droves. You talk to a real estate agent and just let them tell you how many people that are trying to get here. And so I think it's our responsibility to educate. It's our responsibility to teach those that are getting here what it means to be here. There's a reason why you're coming. I mean, obviously you didn't like where you were, so now you're trying to get somewhere where you think you're going to like. Well, that's where we need to learn from some of our history, some of our past history, so that we don't repeat some of those same mistakes. All of our history is not bad. I mean, we're sitting here today because history's been fairly good to us. And so all of our history is not bad. We just need to make sure that we teach people. We educate our young people. You go talk to a young person today about history. Mr. Clore out there, he'd sit down and he could sit down and talk to a group of young people, and they would look at him like he's some kind of crazy guy, because they wouldn't have any clue what he's talking about. And he's talking about the history of Pickens County, a great historian who knows more than he shares with us. And so it's important that we continue to teach people that want to come here, hey, look, this is where we are. This is why you came. But we also have some improvement to make. Sure, there's days that are better than others, but we can get to it. We can get to the point where I can reach out and he knows, I love him as a brother. But we can get to that point where we get along. Everybody gets along and everybody loves each other. We can get to that point, but we have to educate people. We're never going to change some folks. We know that. You're not ever going to change some people. But they need to at least be educated in why and who they are and why they're here.
Thank you.
Gosh, I've got a lot of thoughts going through my head.
I do too.
One of the things that Mayor Perry said that stood out to me is there's no monument to the struggles that African Americans went through in our country, in our county, but there are, in Pickens, there's nothing there. I do want to address something that was alluded to earlier through our cousin, Aaron Mayer, descendant of an enslaved Hagood owner. We have been working together for about 18 months now, and COVID has sort of slowed us down, but we cleaned up the part of the Hagood Cemetery that was enclosed by fencing. On the outside of it was the slave cemetery, and it had never gotten any care. It had never been damaged, but it hadn't gotten care, and so we cleaned it up, and we have plans to fence that area and put a marker there for the enslaved Africans who are buried there. I think that's a step in the right direction from our family perspective. We've also talked to Billy Crawford here at Hagood Mill about some sort of exhibit or historical placard or something honoring those slaves who most certainly worked at Hagood Mill. I think giving people respect, be it in the form of what I'm talking about or just acknowledging the pain, the suffering that they have been through, goes a long way. Also, I was struck by the word heritage, and I was thinking the same thing, and of course Aaron beat me to it, he's so darn smart. But I don't like the use of that word anymore. I feel the same way about it that I feel about the Confederate flag. It had its time and its place, but people have kidnapped that word and those symbols for racist purposes. And I don't like to use the words Southern heritage, nor do I like the Confederate flag. I think it has its place in a museum to talk about the history that went along with it, but I don't think it's anything that we need to flaunt, and I think that has hurt a lot of people, black people in particular, and I don't live in Pickens County anymore, and if I did, I probably would get eggs thrown at my house about some of the things that I'm saying, but it's time for us to move on. It's time for us to put the past in its proper perspective in a historical manner and move forward with change.
Thank you.
I'm half afraid to pick up the mic because I think I was the one that made the sound a few moments ago. But I agree with my cousin here, Gary, because I too am a Hagood descendant. But I think for the most part, people in general associate Southern heritage with military heritage. You're either a Confederate or you're a Yankee. So therefore, everything that trickles down from the Confederacy, be it the flag, be it the statues, be it the leaders, are all considered Southern heritage. If we redefine that, such as that Southern genteel woman, the grits that are milled and sold in Hagood Mills, yes, that was a plug, the baskets that are made along coastal South Carolina, the baskets that are made along coastal Georgia, the jazz of New Orleans, the country music of Nashville. We need to adopt those things as Southern heritage because it cuts across all ethnicities, all genders. No one will be offended. We need to just totally wipe out everything affiliated with Southern heritage that is associated with the military, period. Everything will be solved.
Thank you. We'll come to our third question here in our questions here. What are some programs or activities that you know about or that you're connected with that we have or possibly anticipate coming to the community, which improve the communication and and our additional activities toward increasing a fully involved community? Mayor Perry?
I've thought about this. Don't take this incorrectly. I come here to speak truth, okay? As the mayor of the city of Pickens, I've been blessed. I've been blessed to be able to live the dream that Martin talks about. But when I look back and I look at the overall makeup of my community, I don't see anything really effective that's being done right now to bring that together. I may be missing something, but I spent my first 8 months in office trying to understand what my responsibility was, not just to the citizens of the city of Pickens, but the makeup of the city government. And when you wrestle with things that's going on within the government, I've had little or no time to really look at the things outside of that to find out what is it can we really do effectively to bring people together. Pastor Nate Brawley, who's the pastor at First Presbyterian Church, I speak with him on a lot of occasions. During the Martin Luther King holiday, we gathered at his church and we moved to Griffin Ebenezer, and sometimes we march up to the courthouse steps, and there's a short sermon done by a minister, and there's the speech given by a person, the I Have a Dream speech. And we leave there and come back to the church, and we have a meal, and we don't really do anything else until the next year. And we both have been frustrated with that. So right now, I don't particularly see those effective things that we need to be doing to really bring a consciousness to the table to say, we come together in unity.
Thank you.
I think both of us being here, I think we both have the same answer. Obviously things like this help, but let's be honest. People today are so caught up in their own way of living that they don't have a whole lot of time to do anything that betters anybody else. Let's just be honest. I mean, you know, everybody's so busy, everybody's tied up on social media, everybody's tied up with families, which is all those things are necessary to a certain extent. But we don't have that. You sit and talk, and you go visit your neighbor, and you go. I mean, when I grew up, we had a street picnic twice a year on the street where we lived. You know, and everybody on the street participated. That's right. It sounds funny to people today, but you did it, and you looked forward to it. And everybody came, and they ate, and they had a good time, and nobody wanted to hurry home so they could flip on their computer and see what Facebook had to say and all that kind of stuff. We don't have any of that anymore. You know, we just don't have any of that camaraderie, even whether it be white with white or black with black or white with black. We don't have any of that. And so to be effective in your community, it's really hard. And I know he's worked hard to try to come up with some things for the city to do, or to try to do, attempt to do. And, you know, there's and I'm not laying the blame on anybody, but there's just not a whole lot of things that are out there to be offered. And that sort of goes back to my previous statement when I said we need to educate people. We need to spend time talking to people. We need to spend time gathering people together, and when we get those people together, we explain things like what we're talking about here. And sure, some people may not agree with you, and some people may not like what you say, but you've got to get the conversation started. And so it's a different society we live in than any of us grew up in. And so it's a challenge. It really is. And hopefully these two ladies are going to give us some ideas of how to handle it. We're, as you can tell, we're stalling so that y'all can come up with something. But it's a challenge. We're all busy. We all live our own lives, and it's just a difficult thing.
Thank you.
Gosh, y'all are sure giving me a lot of hard acts to follow. I appreciate what both Mayor Perry and Davey had to say about that difficult question. And even though the demographics are different in the county where I now live and was museum director of Colleton County, we have a 55% African American population. But one of the things that I faced as the director of the museum is we never had any black people coming into the museum. And I felt that our collection ought to be reflective of our population, and events that we did needed to draw all segments of our population. And I can only say by a stroke of luck, not by a stroke of genius, actually, I contacted an African-American dentist who practiced in Walterboro, and he has an extensive African-American art collection. And so we made a huge do. We got on the radio, we talked, we went to churches, we contacted African-American sororities and fraternities and made a big do of the big exhibit we were going to have. And that made such an impact on our African-American population that we started seeing daily visits for them because they trusted us to show their story. And once we got them in there, they saw that we already had some of their story in the museum, and it encouraged other exhibits. I don't know that that really fits the question, but that's the most successful experience that I've had. But I went to a church meeting one time, and we were bemoaning the fact that all Protestant denominations face now not as many people go to church anymore as used to. And that's a sad thing. And one of the ministers there said, you've got to meet people where they are. And he gave an example of the church setting up a lemonade booth at a Little League baseball game, giving out lemonade. Churches meeting together. We've done that in my little Episcopal church. We have an AME church right across the way, and we've each attended special services. We've come together to sing music. I think there's still small ways that you can bring people together. You just have to work a whole lot harder at it because our society doesn't work like it used to do. When we sat on the front porch, rocking at night, when we had community get-togethers, we're stuck in our house, and particularly now with COVID, and we don't know how long that's going to go on. Maybe meet the people on Facebook, at least tell them what you're doing and like their things. It seems a silly thing, but that's where people are. So you've got to meet them where they are.
Thank you. Kathy?
In Winston-Salem, there is a governmental department that specializes on trying to bring the community together as one. They host events such as Cinco de Mayo, Juneteenth, different countries in Africa, different nationalities that are there representative in the community, the Indian community, the Asian community. However, as the gentleman before me have said, once that day is over, everyone scuttles back to their own corner, and they never really interact again. So that really isn't a solution. We're just together for 8 hours of a day, and then we're back in our own separate worlds. So we really don't have anything to bring us together in Winston-Salem. We're separated.
Thank you.
A couple thoughts came to mind when I was listening to some of these discussions here that, a few years ago, I was able to experience on one of the August 3rd Saturday. I'm a musician, and there was a wonderful collection of musicians. I believe the James Brothers were there, and I play in a bluegrass band. I play traditional style fiddle, and at one point, the James Brothers were singing. We were all backstage, and we started playing along with them, and it was that thing that brought us together. And another instance was Bob Reeder had mentioned coming to Pickens County and visiting, and I got to spend a couple evenings with him, and it was such a joy and a pleasure just to. And the friends that he had brought with him, we sat down and I'd play a little bit of fiddle, and we were at the ale house, and there happened to be a couple hand drums in the corner, and a couple of guys, they went and grabbed them, and they'd never heard these tunes in their life, and so I'd play a fiddle tune, and they'd come in with beating out these rhythms, and it was just. We just really were able to connect in that particular experience. It was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed spending time with them, and I was grateful that my daughter was able to be with us and play with us too, and so she was able to experience that very same sort of thing that, we each have our own different stories. We have a face that we show to each other, and some of the things that I'm hearing in all of this and some of the thoughts that have occurred to me are that we need to take the things that do unify us and connect those things together. And it's sort of an octagonal shape. We all have many facets to our lives. And what is the thing that makes that particular angle the thing that connects us together? Just a closing thought on that particular question. Lastly, I would just ask each of you if you have maybe just 45 seconds or to, a minute worth of comment, just as a closing remark as we close out our evening here. Mayor.
I had never met Tom Clover. I'd always read his news articles in the Pickens Courier paper. And every time I read an article that he wrote, it gave me a sense of pride to know that there was a gentleman out there that was going to write about something that may be difficult, but he would lend his thought process to it and he would almost bring it to life. The one thing that I'd like to say, because I live in a city that's 14% African Americans and 81% white, that I would like to see people, when they see something wrong, dadgummit, say that it's wrong. And when it's right, stand by it as hard as you can, okay? And I'm gonna give you two examples, and I've come to understand and love Davey Hyatt because since I've been mayor, I've been in his office a number of times trying to get advice and trying to get something done. But the one thing really stands out with that is in 1947, there was a gentleman by the name of Willie Earl that was arrested, placed in the jail in Pickens. And as I look out my office window, I see that building every day. And that building is now a museum. And a lot of black people will refuse to go into that building because what happened to Willie Earl. Willie Earl sat in that building and had not been to trial, and a number of taxi cab drivers came from Greenville and took him out of the jail and took him to Greenville, beat him, shot him, and killed him, okay? And I had no knowledge of this incident until I returned back to Pickens in 1994 after retiring from the military. And Perry Gravely, a good friend of mine, he's a history buff, and he gives me books to read, and I give him one to read. And we sit and talk about it openly like we're discussing today. And in that book, it talked about a gentleman that had the courage to stand up and say, that was wrong. And that gentleman was named Gary Hyatt, okay? And I just think that when things are wrong, and you see that they're wrong, I need people that's in the majority to stand up and say that it's wrong. The other example, I lost maybe a good friend about 2 weeks ago. We were talking about a cemetery on Cedar Rock Street. You know what that cemetery is?
I do.
That cemetery has been there for a number of years, before probably I was born. But as of today, a black person cannot be buried in that cemetery, could not be buried in that cemetery, okay? And now they say that it's full and that nobody can be buried in there. But there were a number of years that people knew that if you died and you want to be buried and didn't have the money to be buried in a cemetery, that was similar like a city cemetery, but because of the color of your skin, you could not be buried there. Okay? Nobody had the courage to stand up and say, that's wrong. Okay? And a friend of mine talked about that, and I cut him off the other day because I was tired of hearing about it. And I'm going to have to apologize to that gentleman because he's my friend. That's the third thing, and I'll be quiet, I promise. When I was a sophomore at Pickens High School, at that particular time in 1970, black athletes was not allowed to play football at Clemson University. There was a gentleman by the name of R.C. Edwards who was the president of the school. And he made a statement to the athletic division, and I'm going to paraphrase just a little bit. He said, we have not did a good job recruiting Negro athletes, and we need to do a better job. And what did R.C. Edwards do? By him making that statement, they went to a little town in Irmo, South Carolina, and they recruited a gentleman by the name of Marion Reeves. Okay? And he came to Clemson, and he played football, and he did well. And because of that, look at it today. Look at it today. So my closing remark is, if we can go out and recruit the best black athlete to come to Clemson to play football, then why can't we go out and recruit the best black person academically to go to school to Clemson and come back to our community and make a difference? We need people to stand up when something is right, stand up strong. And when it's wrong, stand up and condemn it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hyde?
Thank you, Mayor Perry. Thank you for moderating this event tonight. Thank you to the Hagood Mill for having us here tonight, for all the fine work you folks do out here day after day. And we're very proud to have this in our community, and everybody is very proud of Hagood Mill. We thank you for that. And this is just another example of the things that go on out here that people need to be involved in at Hagood Mill, is events like this and many others that they provide to the community. You know, I simply want to close by saying I'm blessed to live where I live. I'm very thankful to live in Pickens, South Carolina. Sure, we have some problems, but I think we maybe not quite as bad as they are some other places, but we do have some improvement we can make. But I am very thankful to live where I live. And very thankful that I was brought up in a home that taught me that there's no difference in color of the skin. It was, you know, every person's the same, and you make something out of yourself. You have that choice. It's personal responsibility. You choose to do what you choose to do. And so I'm very thankful for that day after day, and I would love to see myself included. I do a very poor job of it, but I'd love to see myself included, be able to see the next generation and the generation after that, to be able to sit here at a table one day and say, my folks taught me that there was no such thing as skin color, that everybody's the same. And as I said, you're not going to change some people. We know that. I mean, we're fooling ourselves if we think we are. But I truly believe that for the most part, people want to treat each other with respect. But I also think that sometimes we get caught up in our way we live and our own selves, and we get selfish, and we forget about those people around us. It's very easy to forget about people around you. I go home at the end of the day and I say, woe is me, you know, I've had this kind of day, and, you know, look at all my problems, and look at all the things I've got to do, and, you know, and I've got a family there, and I've got to sort of try to be the husband and the father at the house, and it's easy for me to say, woe is me, when I really ought to be saying, look at me and let me teach you how I think you need to understand from me. Because whether we like it or not, we are that older generation, whether we like it or not. You know, we always like to think that, you know, we keep looking around for that older generation to keep teaching us. We are it. But we are it. We are it. And the next generation and the generation after us was waiting on us to do something. They're waiting on us. Just like we waited on that generation ahead of us to teach us. And sure, we don't, there's a lot of things that take up our time. But there's some things that are more important than the things we do. And this is one of them, the respect that we need to have for each and every person, no matter who they are, where they come from, or where they've been. And that's the most important thing to me, and that's what I would leave the people tonight that are watching, or whenever you're watching this, is the simple fact is, you know, only by the grace of God are you where you are, and you're no better than the person sitting beside you or in front of you. And when we start remembering that, then our attitudes start changing toward people.
Thank you.
Gosh, Davey missed his calling too. He should have been a preacher. I'm going to take this time really to compliment the Hagood Mill Foundation, Billy, Betty McDaniel, the board of directors here, for having the courage really to do this kind of event, because I think it's very meaningful, and I hope lots of people will watch it on Facebook. It's just like I was saying earlier, we have to reach people where they are. And I think we've said some important things tonight and some things worth thinking about, and hopefully some other people will pick up on that. I'm proud to be a Pickens native. I get the paper at home, I watch things that are happening here, and I'm very proud to be from here. And I wish I could be from here again, but circumstances won't permit it this time. But it's a wonderful place to be. It has so many wonderful natural resources, and it's a great place to live.
Thank you.
Well, finally, I'm going to say that originally, all the laws, the Constitution, etc., were written by rich, white men. And if you didn't fall into that category, unfortunately, you didn't have a say. Hopefully, times have changed. Hopefully, times are changing, because there are still people that are not in those three categories that are asking for a say. We hopefully are giving them the appropriate seeds to change at this point in time. Hopefully, they will remember that they cannot demoralize those people that have gone before. Hopefully, they will remember that they cannot punish those that are out there now, because it's not their fault of what their elders did, the deeds of our elders. So hopefully, the seeds are planted here tonight. Hopefully, people will go forth. And if you don't fall into one of those three categories, as the mayor said, stand up and stand up strong.
Thank you very much.
It's been an honor to be able to be involved with this discussion with all of you, and I just can't begin to describe all the thoughts that are going on in my head right now. It's been very engaging, and I hope that those listening in the live stream later on, that you might also get something out of this, that we ourselves that are here tonight, here on the stage, that we'll take a little bit of this home with us, that we'll carry on this conversation, and we'll continue to show the younger generation the right way to how it's done. I've always said in raising my kids and the raising the next generation is they don't do how you say, they do how you do. So you need to watch how you do. And at this time, we'll go ahead and close, and I'll ask if Billy would come up.
Leave that up here. Thank you, Josh, that was a great job you did moderating that tonight. Thank you, panelists, for coming out tonight. I know it was a long evening, but it was an important evening, and I know that this message that we've shared tonight will be, come over this way, the message that we share tonight will be out amongst the masses. We'll be sharing this, and hopefully that the audience that watches this will learn from it. We can grow from this. Continue what we've started here tonight. And so we just want to thank you guys for that. Before I make a few acknowledgments, Katie, our assistant director, wanted to make a special presentation really fast.
This presentation was supposed to be made during Kids Fest, but unfortunately got canceled due to COVID. I want to give a special award to Miss Betty McDaniel. There is no award better than the Betty Award, okay? We had the Betty Award made for Betty, and this was a staff collaboration. I went and asked everybody. I said, all right, we have an acronym here. What are we going to do for Betty? And so we said, beloved, exceptional, teamwork, teacher, and yaminator. Betty has worked tirelessly all the time. We all know how hard Betty works. She's an absolute gem to have in our community. I am so inspired by you, Betty. I told her the other day, she is my real life hero. I hope one day to affect as much change as you do and do as many important things as you do. Betty has logged over 75 hours to make this event happen. And it wouldn't have been possible without her. She wrote the grant. We got funded by South Carolina Humanities because she put in the hours to make that grant happen. So we love you, Betty. Thank you. And we really appreciate you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. You're the best.
And we're really excited that this event will plant some seeds. We're really excited about the community art of trails, and we're just putting in the Native American interpretive trails, our native roots. And we would love to do something with the more African American history at the Hagood Mill. And so we invite community members, we invite our panelists and the community abroad. We need more volunteers, we need more collaborators. So please reach out to us if this is at all interesting to you. It's all about networking and working together because we can't do anything alone.
That's correct.
Yeah.
We got a great team out here, and we're on the right direction. We just want to thank again everyone that came out. A couple of quick acknowledgments. I want to thank Josh Johnson and his daughter Molly for working the sound tonight and also being the helping out with the panel discussion there. Also want to thank Andrew Mullinax for doing our streaming. He was our streaming live technician tonight. These guys have been out here all day setting this up. Andrew works with a company called Take Part, and it's a collective of creative industry professionals that cover many aspects of digital and print media, from websites, videography, photography, to design and marketing. Take Part provides services for all types of industries. So if you're out there looking for something similar to this, get in touch with Andrew Mullinax and Roy B. Costner at Take Part. Also, this program would not have been possible tonight, one, without Betty, of course, but who was she writing to? The South Carolina Humanities. They did sponsor tonight's event. South Carolina Humanities is a nonprofit organization inspiring, engaging, and enriching South Carolinians with programs focused on literature, history, culture, and heritage. Also, we are grateful for the Art of Community for the part that they played in tonight's program. Art of Community is an initiative of the South Carolina Arts Commission. We also want to thank the Rural LISC, Pickens County, and all those folks that came together behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, to make this thing happen tonight. We really just want to thank you from the bottom of our heart, and good night. God bless. All right.